Hey everybody, I'm here with Bill Housey for the leadership interview. I will let Bill do a little bit of an intro as to what he does and who he works for, and then we'll kind of go into some of the questions.
Great. Well, thanks, Matt. My name is Bill Housey. I am the Senior Portfolio Manager at First Trust. First Trust is an investment firm, and the team that I manage invests over $4 billion in bonds.
Okay, great. How many people do you have on your team?
So on my team, I manage 15 individuals, but like most organizations, your role, it encompasses interacting with a number of different groups across the firm. So whether it's legal or marketing, compliance, salespeople, from an organizational perspective, you are always interacting with a number of different groups.
Great. Okay, so first question would be, can you name a person who's had a tremendous impact on you as a leader? Maybe someone who's been a mentor. Why and how did this person impact your life?
Sure. Well, I think it's a difficult question because I don't think there's any one individual that I can point to that really shaped my own personal leadership style. I think, in fact, it's been many. As I thought through the number of people that have influenced my career, my leadership style, there have been countless individuals that I've looked to say, wow, I really like what that individual does. I really like the way that individual manages a team or an organization. And, my own personal intellectual curiosity in that regard has always had me pay attention to the successful traits of leadership with the leadership of certain individuals. And I think my personal preference, if you will, the one that I've attached most to, is something that I would refer to as the servant leader. I'll never forget the first time I met the CEO of our company, and I'd gone into his office and sat down with him and was talking about the things that I had hoped to do at the organization if they brought me into the organization. And I'll never forget sitting down there and he offered me a cup of coffee, and I thought, well, sure, that'd be great. And I just assumed he'd ring a little bell and someone would run and get a cup of coffee for us. And instead he jumped up and disappeared for about 5 minutes. I actually think he had to go brew a pot of coffee to give me a cup of coffee, and he came back in. And I thought, wow, I just didn't expect that from the CEO of this, really large organization. But that's something that really touched me, and I always thought about that. And, I think most leaders would benefit from remembering that, they not only are running an organization, but they serve the people that work for them too. And I think that's a really important balance.
Okay. What are the most important decisions that you make as a leader of your organization?
Well, I always think about hiring as actually being the most important decision that I make. And I say that because the old adage that one rotten apple does spoil the bunch is so true when it comes to hiring. And I think from a cultural and organizational perspective, the idea is to find people where you can bring them in and they can really just mold with the existing organization, with the existing team. And whether it's a large team or a small team, it really doesn't matter. I've worked on both. You really need to hire the right individuals into the organization that are, really focused on the same things that you are, that are, hungry and passionate about the business. And, I always tell people that when I hire them that you can't fake it. If you're in an organization and you're not passionate about what you're doing, it's just not something you can fake. You can come to work and put your time in and punch the clock every day, but if you're not really loving what you're doing, I'll know it. And I think, it's okay if you're in a job that you don't love, but I think it's also important that you need to communicate if you're in that role so that the person you work for can help you find a job that you do love, that you are passionate about. And, I always thought of that as my role and responsibility for the people who work for me to say, hey, I want to help you be successful, whether that's on this team, another team, or wherever it is. I've always viewed my job as making sure that that individual is successful in any capacity, and I want to make sure that person's given all those opportunities. But if they're not open and honest about that, that's tough. So I always thought, hiring is the most important decision I make. If you make a bad hiring decision, it takes a long time to unwind. So it's something that I try to be very careful, very thoughtful about, because I do think it leads the organization.
Okay, so the people on your team, I know you don't strike me as a micromanaging type of person, but how do you encourage creative thinking within your organization, within your team?
Sure. So I think that the number one way to accomplish this is something that I actually took from our current CEO, and it's to have a very flat organization. Most companies, especially the older, let's call them stodgy, big companies that have been around a long time, they grow and grow, and they get layers and layers of committees and subcommittees and management layers. And the reality is, in my opinion, that just stifles innovation and it stifles growth. So the key thing that we've discovered is that having an incredibly flat organization is really paramount to making sure that everybody thinks entrepreneurially about their role on the team, about their role in the organization. And so, I'll give you an example. Every morning my team comes together at 7:37 in the morning, and nobody's ever late for a 7:37 meeting. So you make it 7:30, they're 5 minutes late. So we make it 7:37 and everybody's on time. They're all sitting at the table waiting to start. But I think, when we come to that meeting in the morning, it doesn't matter whether you've been on the team for 20 years or whether you've been on that team for 20 days. You're sitting at that table with an equal role and an equal chair to contribute to the team and to the organization. And I think that's very important. I've found that when you create ivory towers and you have leaders who believe that everybody's there to serve them, it doesn't foster innovation. It doesn't foster creative thinking and contribution. So I think that the best way to sort of deliver what we're trying to deliver is to have a very flat organization, no hierarchy whatsoever. And it sounds a little crazy, but when everybody's coming to work and everybody's interests are aligned, and that's a really key thing. Our CEO once told me that his job is to align interests. He said if he aligned interests well, he didn't have to manage anybody, and it's very true. So if we're all focused on the same objective and we're all sitting at that table together, then everybody's just working hard towards the same goal, and it's what I think creates a really successful organization.
And that kind of leads into my next question, which is how do you ensure that the organization and its activities are aligned with your core values or your CEO's core values?
Well, I really think that comes down to something very simple, and that's communication. Most often, I think communication can solve a lot of the world's problems, and I think it's no different whether it's a small organization or a big organization. So when we are, thinking about bringing in new people into the organization, that's one of those things where, it's just important that from the beginning of time, we've communicated, this is what we are here to do, and this is the group we're here to serve. And if we've done that well, as new people come in, everybody's running for that same objective, and they just jump right in, and I think it creates a very smooth transition in that way. So I don't think it's the kind of thing that has to be reinvented every time you hire somebody. I think if it's in the culture already, and it's been communicated well over time, I think it just makes it very seamless. And so, in my opinion, it really comes down to communication.
And when you bring in new employees into the organization, how do you help them understand the culture of the organization?
Well, again, I think that's just that communication and just making sure that when you have a culture that's important, for example, if you're in a sales organization, and you are selling to a certain group of clients, well, you want to communicate that we are here to serve that group of clients, and we're going to put them first in every decision. And I think that's what's really important, creating that strong discipline and recognizing what's important to the organization. And if everybody rallies around that goal in that way, then you'll find that everybody's just running the same direction, and that's very important.
So you've kind of touched on hiring quite a bit, and when you're faced with two equally qualified candidates, how do you determine whom to hire?
You know, I have some really, there's some really key things in my mind that are critical when it comes to hiring. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's such an important decision that I make. And it's one that you just have to get right. And I've been in that situation where there's two candidates that look equally solid, but I have one interview question that I ask every candidate, and I really put a lot into this single question, and you might find this humorous, but I always like to ask candidates about the worst job they ever had. And that's not like, what's the worst professional job you've ever had? I want to know the time that you were working at a gas station as a kid and you had to clean the bathrooms, or maybe you were laying concrete, or working construction, or just some really, tough job that you might have had maybe when you were younger, or whatever it was. It was the job that gave you perspective is how I like to think of it. Or I like to even think of it like you've had a proper job. And, if I ask you what the worst job you've ever had is, and you tell me that it was that time you were a swim instructor because the water was really cold in May, you're probably not the right candidate for our group. But if you're somebody who recognizes the value of hard work, I know that on the worst day you have with my team, on the worst day you have in our organization, when you're driving home that night, you're going to be thinking about how grateful you are to have that job, and you're going to come back and ready to get back after it the next day. And I think that just comes from that perspective. And I don't believe that comes necessarily from sitting in a classroom or even sometimes just playing sports. I think it just comes from real world, real life examples and that application.
What is one characteristic that you believe every leader should possess?
Humility, I think, is probably the most important. It's important to recognize that certainly any leader isn't perfect. I make mistakes all the time, and I try to recognize those mistakes because I want to learn from those mistakes. And when my team makes mistakes, we try to focus in on them, not because we want to isolate an individual or a bad practice and make somebody feel bad, but it's to say, hey, we made this mistake as a team. How do we make sure we never make it again? Because the only thing we're all focused on is improvement. So I think having humility, enough so to recognize that you don't always make perfect decisions, and to say, you know what, I wish I would have done that differently, so that next time you can, means that you're evolving into a really strong leader.
What's the biggest challenge facing leaders today?
Yeah, it's a tough one. There are so many challenges, so it's hard to just pinpoint a single challenge facing all leaders today. I think as I've grown in the role that I've had, and I've hired many people over the years, I think one of the challenges that I've had has been to just recognize that with each generation that we kind of go through and hire, there's a different mindset, a different mentality. So whether you're a millennial or a Gen X or Y or whatever the nomenclature is, there are some unique traits with these individuals, and I think it's important as a leader to recognize what motivates these groups, because there are some key differences, I think, at least in my experience, in finding what drives each of those groups. So it's a challenge, and I think we want to make sure that we're running a diverse organization. We want to make sure we have diverse opinions, for those reasons, I think it's important that we understand that we want the people that work for us to feel like they're fulfilled, that they're contributing to something, that they're not just going to punch a press every day, that they take ownership and pride in what they're doing every day. I think all that's very important.
What's one mistake you witness leaders making more frequently than others, if any?
As I think about it, I think certainly you mentioned earlier, micromanaging is a big one. When you have people that work for you that you don't trust them to do the job that they're hired to do. So you end up as a leader micromanaging every decision. And look, I've been guilty of it at times, and I try to recognize it and pull myself back. it's challenging. And even as a leader, you want everything to be perfect. And, I'm always striving for that perfection. Of course, perfection is elusive. It'll, never occur. But if we're striving for it every single day, we get a little bit closer every day. So sometimes, I think that forces a manager to kind of step in almost too invasively at times, micromanage situations. And I think it's very common. It's challenging to let go and release some of that control and just trust the people that work for you as a leader, because you just want to see that outcome, that execution work so well. But as you do evolve and you do begin to trust those people more, what you see is that they really do shine, and frankly, oftentimes they do the job better than you'd have done it yourself anyway. So it's important, I think, to recognize that. But I think I've seen a lot of leaders do that, where they just try to micromanage too many decisions, and frankly, it's too much for that person, and it's just not a successful long-term trait. It's not a successful long-term strategy.
And so what's the one behavior or trait that you've seen derail more leaders' careers? Would that be the micromanaging, or?
Well, I think, as we watch the news lately, I think it's integrity more so than anything else. And, I've always had the benefit, I think, of working for folks who have had a really firm line in terms of what's black and white and never gray, in terms of just having strong integrity. And I think if you have leaders who are wired that way, it runs the folks that they hire, the people that work for them, they tend to think the same way, and nobody starts to step over a line they shouldn't cross, because it starts at the top. And I just see so many organizations where you have leaders who basically they've made some questionable decisions, and I think that lack of integrity can flow through and really eat an organization like a cancer, because it just gives the people in the organization the mentality that, or the mindset that type of behavior is okay, whatever it might be. And I think that's something that's very important. I think it's just critical that you have from the top, strong and really firm integrity, and that you run the organization that way. And then when your people are tasked with a tough decision, they instantly know that it's just better to deal with the consequences of whatever it is than to do something they shouldn't do, because that's what the CEO would want, or the leader of that group would want. And I think it's something that starts at the top and comes all the way down.
What are a few resources that you would recommend to somebody looking to gain insight into becoming a better leader?
Well, I think it's important to, as I mentioned, it's a lifelong pursuit. It isn't the kind of thing where you can just pick up a book and you read it and you're a better leader. I think you pick up aspects or attributes that you can improve on. I'll never forget, I read a book. It was called Good to Great, and the idea is how good companies become great companies, and it was authored by Jim Collins. And one thing that always struck me about this, and I read it a long time ago, was that there's been a lot of great leaders who have led big companies, and then when they leave, the company sort of collapses and implodes because they didn't create a successful legacy, a successful way for the people beneath them to step into those roles. The people beneath them were never empowered to really foster into more of a succession type of a position. And so again, it talked about how hiring was such an important thing for every organization, and those types of things that I picked up. So I would say that it really comes down to watching leaders and saying, boy, I really like what that person's doing, and just paying attention to it, or picking up a book like Good to Great, and seeing what attributes or elements you can take from it. But it is more of a lifelong pursuit, I think. I don't think of it as any single individual thing that I've ever done, whether it's taking leadership courses, which I've done at Northwestern, or reading books or magazine articles, or just paying attention to leaders I think that have made good decisions, or I like the way that they lead and to help influence me. All of that culminates into helping shape you as a better leader, and I think it's important that you do all those things to try to shape yourself.
What advice would you give someone going into a leadership position for the first time?
Well, I think first, the important thing is to recognize what got you to that position. I've seen many times where someone steps into a leadership role, and the minute they get in, the personality switches, and you have to remember that you climbed up this ladder to get this leadership role, and you've worked next to several colleagues for a long time, and suddenly you're in this role. And it's important to recognize that those people that have worked next to you for a long time, they're still your colleagues. They're still the people that have worked with you. Now they may be working for you, but it's important to treat them with that same respect that you've always treated them with. And I think it's important because as you step into that role, you don't just become anointed a leader and you are suddenly a true leader. I think leaders need to earn the respect of their colleagues. And the way that's done is to respect their colleagues. A leader respects his or her colleagues from the beginning, and by doing so, by continuously demonstrating the leadership that put that person in that role, I think what they find is that those people that maybe perhaps worked alongside them begin to look at them like the leader that they truly are and respect them in that way. You don't want to suddenly step into a role and put yourself in like you're the king of everybody, because that's not what got you into that spot. What put you into that spot was the respect that you had for your colleagues, the integrity that you had, the way you led yourself, and to remind yourself of that every day, and to remind yourself that you're there to lead. And I think to be humble in that way is very important every day.
Last question. What are you doing to ensure that you continue to grow and develop as a leader?
Well, I think some of that just goes back to what we were talking about before in terms of, always be thinking and looking for ways to improve. If you're driven, if you're motivated, and most leaders are, we wake up early, we, start the day by, getting the blood flowing in the morning, and we're fired up to start the day, and we're always thinking of ways to improve. We're always, challenging ourselves. I don't know that, as I think about the goals and objectives I've set for myself, both for my business and as a leader, that, frankly, I don't know that they're even achievable, but they're a prize that I run for every single day. And so, it's a continuous development is really what it comes down to, that hunger for continuous learning, knowledge, reading and absorbing and watching, and always looking for ways to improve is really the only way that you will improve, and to really truly recognize where your weaknesses are. To be able to say, I can do a better job of whatever the aspect is, and to make real change around that. And it's hard, it's very difficult. And it's, sometimes, as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. And so you may make that same mistake many, many times, but it's a continuous evolution. And I think it just needs to be thought of that way. It's not a letdown if you make the same mistake twice, as much as it is an opportunity to take it and to find a way to improve a different way. And that's what you're, always working towards, I think, as a leader.
Well, I, for one, feel inspired. I just want to thank you for your time. I know you're a busy guy. And is there anything else that you want to add? Parting thoughts, final thoughts, or?
No, I think, you've done a terrific job of asking some really important questions. As I said, I think that it really comes down to a continuous evolution of a process. I think that really what a leader does well is to align interests and to hire good people who really want to work hard and contribute to the success of the organization. And you know, you'll find that it doesn't matter, you know, skill set or anything like that. It's or do you have people that are passionate and they'll run hard and they'll make the right contributions. So, thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, thank you.